Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Om, salutations to our Gurus. Namaste once again, dear friends, and welcome to the third session of the 22nd day of the Global Festival of Yoga, celebrating wellness. We have had amazing sessions thus far, and we are going to bring to you another one today, a dialogue on yoga and mystical traditions of the world, curated by the Global Peace Initiative of Women. In the Rig Veda, they say, Ekam sad vipraha bahudha vadanti. There is one truth which has many forms. And then they also talk about the ritasya panthaha, the paths of the right. So there is this understanding that there is maybe one truth, different forms, and each individual has the freedom to discover that in their own way. And in today's dialogue, we are sincerely hoping to get deeper insights into different approaches to this greater understanding of ourselves, a platform that yoga, or rather an invitation that yoga offers its practitioners. So I invite Hannah to tell us a little more about GPIW, which is collaborating with us on this program of the Global Festival of Yoga.
Namaskar and good morning, everyone from New York City. My name is Hannah, and I work with the Global Peace Initiative of Women. We are an organization in New York City, and we were really founded on a principle of unity and diversity. And our mission really is to bring together spiritual thinkers from various traditions and sampradayas throughout the world to discuss how we can address some of the biggest issues our world is facing. So we're super excited to welcome all of you to this panel session on yoga and the mystic traditions. And I would like to introduce you to Dina Miriam, who is the author of the book, The Untold Story of Sita, and she is also the vision and founder of the Global Peace Initiative of Women. Dina, off to you.
Okay, let's see. Namaskar. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about a subject so dear to the hearts of many of us, the mystical traditions and the unity that we find in the mystical traditions. I'm very pleased to introduce our dear friend, Rabbi Rami Shapiro. Rami is the author of over 36 books on religion and spirituality. He's one of the preeminent figures in the interfaith world, having participated in and had been the vision behind many, many interfaith gatherings around the world for many, many years. He's the co-director of the One River Foundation, and he hosts 2 podcasts, Essential Conversations with Rabbi Rami and Conversations on the Edge. So very happy to have Rami here to moderate this discussion. Rami, over to you.
Thank you, Dina. Namaskar to all of you. And I am very pleased to do this for a number of reasons. 1, I love the topic. 2, I'm enthralled by our panelists. And 3, anything Dina asks me to do, I do with gratitude. So let me introduce our 3 panelists. Sraddhalu Ranade is a scientist, educationalist, and scholar. He's been residing at Sri Aurobindo Ashram since he was 6 months old. That's before he was a scientist, educationist, and scholar. So he's been there a long time. He grew up in the care of the late Sri MP Pandit. He's presently involved in various activities, including video production, teacher training programs, and software development. A multifaceted personality, he delivers talks and conducts workshops on numerous themes, including integral education, management, self-development, Indian culture, science, spirituality, and yoga. He's conducted numerous intensive teacher training workshops in integral and value-based education throughout India. In the last few years, over 4,500 teachers from more than 200 schools and colleges from all over India have benefited from these programs. So Sraddhalu, welcome. Lama Palden Drolma is the founder and senior Lama of Shukhasiddhi Foundation, a Vajrayana Buddhist center in the Shangpa and Kagyu traditions. With gratitude to her gurus, Lama Palden transmits, trains, and mentors students, passing on the teachings and practices that enable one to reach complete awakening in this life. She has a lifelong interest in comparative mysticism and interspirituality. In addition, she's a licensed psychotherapist doing groundbreaking work with individuals and groups in the intersection of spirituality and psychology. Third is Heike Gurulman. She is from Turkey. She's been practicing yoga, meditation, and philosophy for over 20 years. She got her yoga instructor certification 20 years ago in the year 2000. And in 2015, she received an advanced yoga degree, and she's the only Turkish person holding that degree. She's affiliated with Vaisa Yoga University, and she's been organizing yoga and programs and coordinating distance education. She's founded Istanbul Yoga Center 10 years ago and the Purnam Publishing House 9 years ago. Purnam is the first publishing house specializing in yoga practices and philosophy. She herself has authored 1 vegetarian cookbook. She's co-authored 3 yoga therapy practice books, 1 meditation CD, and translated 12 yoga philosophy books, I'm assuming into Turkish. She's been organizing Yoga Istanbul activities in collaboration with Consulate General India, which is to date still the biggest yoga event in the country. She started the first yoga mobile app in Turkish, and that's called Evde Yoga. She has been, I guess continues to be really, active on YouTube and offers free classes with volunteering, with instructors who volunteer. And she's been doing that for 4 years. I think I got all that right. That was a lot to get through. So I appreciate you all coming on. Can you put on your videos and unmute, the 3 of you? Okay, Lama Palden. And Sraddhalu, where are you?
Namaste, I'm here online.
Thank you. Thank you. And Heike?
I'm here.
Okay, very good. So what I asked the 3 of you to do was to just take a couple of minutes and give us, and I realize this is difficult. It's much easier to talk for longer periods of time, but to give us in as concise, succinct way as possible, 2, 3, 4 minutes, the core idea that you would like us to get from this conversation. So Sraddhalu, you can start.
Okay. Core idea. The most important thing which we have to keep in mind is that we are not here by chance. We are part of an unfolding evolution that is taking place in the entire universe. And as an evolution, what it is unfolding is the very character of its source, the divine from which the entire universe bursts out to manifest its divinity. But it begins from a complete self-loss and rebuilds as if from self-loss to complete self-discovery. And so we, as conscious thinking beings, are only a part of like a rising fountain of consciousness awakening to its own origin, to its own highest potential. And so we are not here by chance. We had to be here. The entire universe is inevitably compelled to continue to evolve to its entire divine potential, unendingly. And so when we look at our life, our traditions, and in fact look at the big picture of traditions across thousands of years, every tradition is an impulse driven by that one original source. And that is why you will find all the traditions inherently are complementary. And if you see appearances of contradiction, well, they are only appearances because of some exaggerated specialization or exaggerated emphasis or something like that. And the movement is not you and me separately going our way. It is the one divine consciousness growing to its fulfillment through each one of us. And when we begin to look at the whole world and evolution in this way, we do not see conflicts. We do not see real divisions. We only see a play of possibilities of differences in the unity. And to bring this to the context of yoga, this whole movement that has been driving us has not been of our choosing. It's not like we said, okay, let me grow, let me develop, let me evolve. The most profound impulse in everything in the universe, even in the atom, and in the worm, and in the animal, and in the human, and in the whatever extraterrestrial species we may meet, the same profound impulse has been pushing us. In the yoga tradition, we will call it the divine will, as Agni seated within, in the very essence of all forms pushing forward this evolution. And so there is a kind of an evolutionary drive that is going on, which Sri Aurobindo calls the unconscious yoga of nature. We call it nature because we don't understand who she is or why she's doing what she does. But it is actually the divine will secret behind appearances pushing everything to grow. That's why a newborn baby wants to learn, wants to grow, wants to realize his potential in spite of every possible setback in life. This is the second most important idea, that there is an unconscious yoga of nature that's driving us whether we like it or not. The third important idea that emerges from this is there comes a point in our journey where we become conscious that there is this evolutionary impulse. And now instead of being driven unconsciously, we take charge of this and begin to participate consciously. And from that point on, what nature took maybe 1 million years to achieve, we can achieve maybe in a single lifetime, or at least in a dozen lifetimes. And so the conscious accelerated evolutionary potential that we have awakens in us, and this conscious accelerated evolution is what we call yoga. But in a way, everybody is participating in a yoga. And when I use the word yoga, I mean it in this most universal and in this most comprehensive sense. In India, a whole body of knowledge was developed to assist in this acceleration of this evolution. And over the centuries, over the millennia, it developed specializations and specialized techniques and methods. And like a science and a technology of matter, which we call material science, it developed a psycho-spiritual science and technology that diversified over the centuries to include every human need and every human type. So the totality of this body of knowledge and technology is what we will call yoga. So in a way, I will even say every tradition in the world, whether they use the word yoga or not, has in its essence, in its foundations, a yogic knowledge, which is its secret, sometimes esoteric knowledge, but which is the means by which it accelerates evolution or development of consciousness. So when I use this word yoga, I mean it in this sense, and mysticism is only this discovery of the layers behind the appearances. What physical science has done is to take us behind appearances to layers. Yoga does the same thing, takes us into the deeper spiritual potential. And that's our opening to the mystical potential. So in a sense.
Yeah, that was beautifully done. And we're going to let everybody go now because there's really nothing else to say. No, thank you, Sraddhalu. That was great. So Aika, you want to give us your summation before we even start?
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, after Sraddhalu, I don't know what else to say, really. But also in Turkey, I totally agree with him. In Turkey also, we are having the Sufism, and this is the mystical part of Islam. And when you look at the Sufism, which actually is going to be what I will be talking about today, of course, I should also note that I'm not a disciple of Sufism, so what I will be explaining to you is whatever that I know of. But when I look at it, with all the tiny knowledge that I have, it is not at all different than what we are having as a teaching in yoga. So as already told, there is this unity in diversity. In every culture, the elements of yoga is available in different languages. For example, if Sufism is discussed, it is of course about Arabic language, so you need to learn the terminology of it. But even the states that are stated, the states that you have to just achieve, is very, very similar to what Patanjali is talking about. So I hope that today, we will be just discussing about all the similarities and some differences that Sufism and yoga has. So I should also say I'm a student of yoga, not Sufism, just because I'm Turkish and I'm Muslim, so I will be just talking about it today. So sorry if I just misguide you, if because of my tiny knowledge, if I say something mistakenly wrong.
Okay, I doubt that's going to happen, but I appreciate your willingness to entertain that. And I don't know if everyone is aware of it, but you can post questions in the question and answer box. So if you have something to say, you need some clarity, put them in there. And after this, we're going to enter into a conversation amongst the three of them, moderate that, and then we're going to open it up. So if you have things on your mind, you want to get them down, you can put them there. So Lama Palden. So it's hard to go third because now there's not much left to say maybe, but.
So I'm going to speak from a slightly different point of view. But of course, I agree with the unity and diversity. And I always think of it as we don't just want one flower in our garden, but we enjoy a variety of flowers. And the various spiritual traditions are our variety of flowers in our human garden. So I'm in the Tibetan Buddhist, the Vajrayana tradition. And this is a Buddhist tantric tradition, and in that sense is very specifically a yogic and mystical tradition. So from the way I see it, mysticism is an inner path and an inner lineage of connecting both inside and outside of ourselves until there is no difference between ourselves and what is divine, what is sacred, with the awakened beings and with the vast, unlimited, open expanse of wisdom and love. So recognizing the reality of what is and who we truly are. In Vajrayana Buddhism, there's many kinds of meditation practice that work step by step to purify, transform, and liberate us into who we truly are. And these meditations include intensive breath practices, physical yogas, visualizing, which is actually an imaginal kind of meditation that includes the mind and all of the senses, and is usually done simultaneous with mantra or chanting practice, chanting sadhanas, etc. And these various types of meditation are designed to work on our entire psychophysical, psychospiritual system. I agree with what's been said already about yoga, that it's inherent to the inner spiritual traditions of various times and places. And the specific yoga that arose in India is very profound in that it teaches us to be one with our body and breath, and to bring our awareness to our body and breath. All the various kinds of spiritual practice rewire our minds, bodies, and our subtle bodies. So the subtle body, both within Vajrayana Buddhism and within Hinduism, consists of what's called in Sanskrit nadi, or channels, prana, or the movement, and bindu, or the essential energy. In Tibetan, these are called sa, lung, and tigli. So the rewiring process that happens when we engage in our spiritual practices undoes the karmic knots and constrictions in the nadis, or channels, so that the prana, or the current, can flow. Our habitual patterns of ignorance have created constrictions and knots that are sort of simultaneous with our psychological patterns. So as we rewire this, a healing can happen. As the prana starts to flow more fully in the channels, this heals and enhances the bindu, or the energy. As this rewiring occurs, the habitual unwholesome patterns, along with the emotions that are in conflict, come up into our consciousness for release and liberation. And there's a process of us acknowledging them and letting them go, which is very much a learned skill for most of us. As I mentioned, yoga teaches us to join awareness with our body and breath. When awareness, breath, and loving kindness meet our painful emotions, meet our karmic knots, meet our trauma, profound healing, transformation, and liberation can happen. In my view, in my practice, my understanding of myself and working with people over many, many, many years, joining awareness, breath, and loving kindness with our felt sensations is actually a miracle tool for healing and awakening. The rewiring process removes our obscurations to knowing who we truly are and to actualizing this, who we truly are, primordially pure, awake presence in a primordially pure, awake world. This is called dharmata in Sanskrit in the Tibetan tradition, chuni in Tibetan, reality as it is, suchness, pure being. These are all translations for dharmata. So discovering our unification, the reality of dharmata, of who we are and what is reality, is this path of the union of mysticism and yoga.
Okay, so I'm completely confused, but that's good because then I have questions to ask. So I want to put this to all three of you. Just going to, Sraddhalu said that Sraddhalu, you can fix my language for me, but that we're all part of this infinite cosmic evolution, that everything is the way it is because at the moment everything has to be the way it is given the evolutionary nature of this greater reality. You all spoke to this greater reality. And then Lama Palden raised this notion of knots. So here's my question to the three of you, and just for no reason whatsoever, maybe you'll start. So here's my question. Why the knots? If everything is dharmata, if everything is suchness, in Judaism we would say, we do this wordplay, chachma meaning wisdom, but the mystics say you could pronounce it koachma, which means suchness, essentially, things as they are. So if things as they are at the moment are the cutting edge of this evolutionary process moving us toward enlightenment, and these knots exist that keep us from realizing ourselves as waves of this cosmic evolutionary process. Are the knots really a problem? Do they need to be untangled? And why do they exist in the first place? So, like I said, I just picked on you. So do you have any opinion why we have these problems?
Okay. Well, I can just give you more of my personal idea of it, because as I said, this for the Sufism, it's a big talk, and I don't want to make mistakes, to be honest. But actually, when you look at the view of the world, everything is there for a reason. I totally agree with Lamaji. But when you talk about from the perspective of the godly view, or from the view of the unity, nothing actually is existing anyway. So it is about the perspective that you are actually picking up. If you are talking about we are going from point A to point B, that means to say, if we, as humans, we are asking this question. But from the perspective of God or from the unity, there is no such question, because nothing is actually happening. And now I will be coming to the Sufism aspect of it. You know, in Sufism, what I'm knowing is that that aspect of God, that is almost impossible to be achieved. So it is so ultimate level that we have to continue the evolution. So the more that we try, the more bigger that is revealed, and then you have to run behind. So the samadhi aspect or the nirvana aspect, kaivalya aspect of it, as they say, the enlightenment is an ongoing process that will never end. So what we try to do is to perfect ourselves to an existential level of that one God. And then, you know, in Sufism, they say that you have to find yourself and then lose yourself and then find yourself again so that you can lose yourself. So it's more like an endless cycle. And only some very special souls can go to that place. And this ultimate level that we say, the unity of everything, is reserved to one person. This is called Prophet Muhammad. That is the idea. But then there are some traditions in Sufism that say the door is open for the rest of the people to enter also. So even that is under debate. But when you look at all the this nirvana stages that the Sufism is talking about, it is such an ultimate place that I think, you know, we should not even be discussing about that, because, you know, there are like 7, 8 other stages that you need to pass to come to that. I think, you know, that discussion can be left to the souls that are just behind that level, to be honest.
So, Sraddhalu, you can pick this up if you want, about why there are these knots. But I want to just add to that, because all of you seem to be saying, if I heard it right, that, you know, we are whatever this greater reality is. I mean, we're not, like the relationship between a wave and the ocean. Every wave, no wave is the entirety of the ocean, but the ocean is the entirety of every wave. So if you and I are the entirety of, you can call it suchness or God or whatever you want to call it, if we are the entirety of that already, is that what is meant? Can we realize that in this lifetime? And if that's true, if this entirety is present always, are the knots not also part of the entirety? Sraddhalu, you want to? I've never been in a conversation with you that I couldn't ask you something that you weren't prepared to expound on. So I'm sure you've got something to say.
Yes, you're right. The knots are a part of the entirety. The whole problem comes when we try to separate the reality into two things. Even the analogy you gave is defective. There's the ocean and then there are waves. And the ocean is the whole of all the waves. Yes, that's one way of looking at it, but it's not the true way. The true way is to see every wave as the entire ocean leaning forward to become one wave, and the entire ocean leaning forward to become another wave. There is nothing other than entire ocean. And therefore, now when you extend this to the reality, every single object, every atom, every flower is the entire divinity putting up a special front. And the knots, what you call knots, are only the unbalanced relationships of these special fronts. But the things out of which the knots are made are still essentially the entirety of the divine. But in the appearance and in the special projections, they seem to be clouded, confused, mixed, etc. And so there is as if the sense of layers being created in reality or in the experience of reality, screens covering reality. This idea of screens in the yoga tradition is called Maya. And the root sound of the word Maya is to measure out. The power of the divine reality to measure out its finite appearances out of its essential infinity, and to play with these appearances of finiteness. And in the midst of that play, the appearance of chaos is your knots and your problems. But as each piece recovers its divinity, it discovers that the apparent chaos is actually an appearance, and it quickly moves to express its inherent reality and harmony and beauty. So there's nothing which is not essentially that, and yet everything in appearance is concealing that, and that's why the problems.
So I'm going to say this in English, and maybe one of you can, or you can say it in Sanskrit, where maybe it's Shankara, I'm not sure who said this, but the world is unreal, the world is Maya, only Brahman is real, Brahman is the world, right? So even Maya is part of the Leela, the play of this singular reality. Is that fair, what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Shankara
I mean,
is...
you can disagree with me. You can't
Yeah, that's
disagree
fine.
with
You should
Shankara.
feel free. Shankara does say something which can be interpreted in that way, but the same thing can be interpreted also to mean, if you look at the word Maya as the appearances of limitation, that there is nothing which is essentially limited. But the problem of the ascetic path is that it separates the world from the reality or from the divinity. And then the world becomes either illusory or as a domain of suffering that needs to be rejected. But if we experience the world as a manifestation of that reality, then you do not know the divine and the absolute unless you know its relativities, because they are its relativities. And you must know both in totality the way the divine knows himself. That should be our goal in evolution. So nothing is illusory except in appearance. All is real, including the material world.
Lamaji, you want to jump back in?
Yeah, this is exactly the same from a Vajrayana point of view, exactly what Sraddhalu was saying, and that there isn't anything that isn't primarily pure, or the truth that has all the qualities of awakening. Awakening is everywhere, and it's called in Buddhism the two truths. So there's the truth of what appears, which is governed by cause and effect, and the truth of ultimate reality of the primordial purity, the primordial suchness, the union of wisdom and love. But all of these are terms, and there's no separation between the two truths, like Sraddhalu was articulating very beautifully. So there's within the knots are, from a Buddhist point of view, caused by our ignorance of our fundamental situation and who we are and what reality is, but they're not ultimately real. They're infused with what is truth. They're not ultimately real in that they don't truly exist, and they're inseparable with awakened awareness, but they're appearing to us in this way due to our ignorance. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how it's articulated from a Buddhist point of view.
So
the two truths are true and inseparable. Sorry, just to say one more thing about that, that we meet the appearance with love, not with, like Sraddhalu was mentioning, like not splitting it off and thinking that it's something negative, but we meet it with love, embracing the entirety.
So where does love play out in, when you hear, Sraddhalu, when you hear Lama Palden talk about love, which was a new, something she brought in, what's your reaction to that?
In fact, I was inspired to comment on that, because when you look at the reality in this way, there is only one expressing itself in so many ways, waves and ways. What's the relationship between each wave? In its appearance, they could collide, but in their underlying reality of the entire ocean meeting ocean, the only relationship can be one of recognizing yourself in a different form, and the only relationship you can have with yourself in totality is one of utter self-giving, which is that love. And so underlying every experience, underlying every object in the universe is this divine love that sustains, and if not for that, we would not have survived. And that love, of course, is concealed, of course, is reflected in reflections and reflections and reflections, so we get little bits of it and glimpses of it. But it is that which pulls together every atom and every molecule and every cell and every creature and every being. And all relationships are really colors or distorted colors or reflected colors of that one love. which is not monotone, it is infinitely diverse also.
So before I let you go, okay, you want to jump right in on that? Go ahead.
Yeah, can I?
Of course.
You know, actually, love is actually the means to open up these knots, if I'm going to call it knots, in Sufism. What is described is that we are more of a person, more of people that are using our mind. That means intellectually we make the decisions. And the problematic area is with the heart, because we are having the love for the worldly matters, worldly objects, because, you know, we see duality in the world. And then we have the love for all these things that we want and we do not want, the desire and the ego. That has to be dissolved through Sufism, through Sufi practices. That is called tasawwuf in Turkish. And through that, there's going to be the soul that will be revealed, which is having the godly qualities. So if we are in the duality, it is because of the intellectual quality of the man that makes him manly. But when we just dissolve the knots of the heart by changing the love from the love for the worldly objects to the godly love, then we go to the properties for the soul, and then we become godly. That is the main idea. So it is actually not different, but Sraddhaluji talked about. So it is to see this love, the divine life, love everywhere. All the practices are basing on this. And so because it is a religious mystic practice, the Sufism is, the devotion part is very much there. The tapas is there, that means the discipline part is there, but the devotion part is so much there. Whatever that you will be revealing this divinity of love about everything, you have to just do the singing, chanting, and meditation, and dancing, all these things, all these aspects are there. So I totally agree.
So I could say singing, dancing, meditation, I mean, these are all embodied activities. So I'm curious from all of you, but I'm curious how the love manifests. Let me put it this way, how the love manifests in the body. Because we can talk about love in the abstract, and we're not talking about romantic love, or I don't know, maybe we are in some sense. But how does it manifest in the body? What I'm thinking of, to just help clarify the question I'm asking, is long time ago, Sigmund Freud introduced us to the concept of what he called polymorphous perversity, which sounds horrible, but what it means in his system is that the entire body, that's the polymorphous part, the entire body is in an erotic connection to the universe. So where that, as Sraddhalu says, you know, the ocean is, there's no ocean wave, there's the ocean waving. And the awareness of the body, that it's being waved by this infinite reality. What is the physicality of it? Is it located anywhere? Do you talk about chakras in that context? Or is this something radically different? Is this some kind of a radically different experience?
Can I say?
Yeah, please.
Okay. In Sufism, the concept is to change this attitude towards life. And how you do it is through the practices, Sufi practices, which means to say, you will try to understand that the love for everything, that means the balance of the mind, first of all, which is samatva in yoga. It is not different than what Bhagavad Gita is talking about. And when you have that, then when you start seeing this, different polarities are actually the same. You start seeing the attributes, the different attributes of God is manifested through human beings or entire universe only. So that means to say, you do not start seeing a person that is showing an attribute, but you will start seeing the attribute itself manifested through that person. So that is a huge different perspective of seeing the world. That brings the unity. That means there are two things that you try to reveal about God in Sufism. One is the attributes of God. The other aspect is to know yourself. That means all the names belong to Him. So the attributes and the names of God. And what we see from our human perspective is all the diversity. So I see one person angry, I see one person compassionate, one see lovingly, one as an enemy. But whenever that I see that they are just manifesting the qualities, the attributes, or the names of one God only, that brings the change, that brings the love for divinity. But it's a whole process that you have to walk through, making all these practices years and years, maybe lives after lives. I don't know, because in Sufism it is difficult, because in some sects of Sufism, this reincarnation is not there, so you have to do it now. In some sects of Sufism, you have that chance to continue in the next life.
Which is always, always a hopeful thought if I don't get it yet. Lama Palden, what do you make of where your idea has taken us?
Well, it's very hard to talk about love, but I think that I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, who was just speaking from the Sufi point of view. I think this is part of spiritual practice to orient toward love. From a Buddhist point of view, this is our innate nature. The wisdom, awakened awareness, and love are inseparable. The nature of awareness is love. And of course, this is all empty. And the empty nature of everything in awareness is realizing that is the wisdom aspect. But without the orientation, like she was saying, toward the love, we're not fully in touch. And you were asking about the embodiment. So it's through this orientation that we begin to clear away everything that isn't love within us, so that we can feel it more intimately all of the time for all that is, until eventually there's no subject or object difference or duality between feeling love for something, but there just is love in one's experience, and the totality is experienced as the nature of awakened awareness love, or divine love, inseparable with all that is. But it's on a human level, our orientation toward uncovering this, embodying this, that helps bring us to this actually freeing and incredibly nourishing and satisfying experience of really actually feeling the love within and without, and the lack of separation.
I have a 4-year-old grandson who I see even in the midst of pandemic. I see him almost every day. He lives very close. And while we do our best to keep social distancing, the social distance, still he's there. And one of the things that amazes me about him, just using him as my example, is that he is often, more often than not, in a state of wonder and awe. So you show him a bug, because he's really interested in bugs, and you can see his eyes light up. He takes a very close look at the bug. He's got his magnifying glass. He's counting the legs. He's doing all these things. And you can see, and maybe I'm just projecting, but it seems to me that when I watch him do this, he and the bug are not two. There's some kind of non-duality manifesting there. So the language is very difficult to articulate, but he's in a sense in love with the bug, And then he does this other thing where he doesn't usually become a bug, but he's very interested in penguins and in rabbits, because we have no penguins where I live, but we have lots of rabbits. And he becomes the rabbit. So he announces, I'm now a rabbit. And he hops around the yard like a rabbit and tries to do what he sees the rabbits doing. And he's losing his sense of limited humanness as he becomes this other being. So my question around love was to try to get at the physicality of it. I mean, we could talk about love, and I think we are somewhat talking about love in the abstract, but his entire body becomes this expression of all wonder and love. How does it feel in the body to experience this love? What does it do, you think, to our nervous system, to our breathing, to our heart rate, to our brain chemistry? Any idea of, and I know I think Sraddhalu does a lot of work with science and spirituality, so maybe he wants to pick this up, but what's the physiology of this awakened love?
You're asking
So,
me?
I will, since you asked. If I'm asking you, sure, I'm asking you.
It's like asking, what's the physiology of your thought? And if you were to tell me it's brainwaves, then I would say you're wrong. Inherently, thought is not a physical process. And the physiology of thought, therefore, is at best a reflection. It's like looking at your reflection in the sunlight and saying, I've got Rabbi, I've got him, Rami, but no, I have only a shadow. And this is the problem, and I'm glad you brought up this word that you don't know how to express that experience the child has. The whole problem is we're speaking in English, which has only one word, love, for a variety of 20 different experiences. So the child is in love with a bug, and you can say you love your wife, and a child will say, I love ice cream, or I love my dog, and they're completely different experiences. But we use one word, and so we get into a big confusion. Someone says, no, love is like this. Someone says that. No, they're talking of different things. If you speak in Sanskrit and in the language of yoga, then we have 20 different words for 20 different experiences. So yes, divine love is a fundamentally different experience, which you cannot experience as long as you live in a consciousness of duality and division. Because that experience belongs to a consciousness which is undivided and incapable of division and infinite. So when infinity, which is undivided, meets itself, that is divine love. But when it meets the bug, that knows bug as infinite, which is undivided, and so can experience divine love. But the bug cannot experience it because it does not know itself infinite and undivided. And so the child in the relationship with the bug, at best we can say, is reflecting something of the divine love, like the shadow, or shadow of a shadow of a shadow. And to that extent, in the physiology, something may reflect. But it may reflect in strange ways. It may reflect in a heat in the chest. It may reflect in just a calm and quiet joy. And they can be completely different reflections, but they are not in themselves that. So to your question, because you're reducing it to physiology, I will say it can represent itself in a million ways in the physiology, and they could be contradictory in appearance.
So the reason I'm bringing up the physiology, and I appreciate your response always, the reason I'm bringing up the physiology is the body, no less than everything else, is a manifesting of this suchness. And sometimes in spiritual practice, there's a tendency to denigrate the physical. Sometimes there's a tendency to overemphasize the physical. So I didn't want to get that lost in the process. Though, to be honest, in my own, I guess I could say this, in my own practice around, my own devotional practice around the Divine Mother, I often feel what I would call an ecstasy that includes the body. I don't think the word erotic is the right word, but the word ecstasy is the right word.
I like your phrasing because you say it includes the body.
Yeah, but not. It's not because you said reduced. I'm not reducing, but I want to include. I mean, you could use Ken Wilber's language, to embrace and transcend, to include and transcend. So we're just going to take a couple more minutes, and we're going to open it up to everybody to ask questions, and I'll pose some questions to you from the audience. But just quick thing to sort of shift in another direction just for a moment. So years ago, and I don't remember how many years ago, but it was quite a while, I was invited to India to the Ramakrishna Math in New Delhi to give a talk along with a lot of other people from different traditions in honor of Swami Vivekananda's 150th, what would have been his 150th birthday. And the topic that we were given was, what does your tradition, and I'm going to change that in a second, but what does your tradition bring to this discussion that the others don't? So let me rephrase that based on just what Sraddhalu said a moment ago about language. What's the value, or put it this way, what can we say, and Sraddhalu, you've already done this very well. So what can we say in the language of Vajrayana Buddhism, or the language of yoga, or the language of Sufism, or the language of Hinduism is a British invention, so a misnomer, but in the language of Judaism, Christianity, etc., that adds to this conversation. So we don't have representatives from all these traditions, but if you had one thing, what is the genius of your tradition's language that needs to be articulated in a universal language of reality or the truth? Does that make, I don't know if I'm asking that right. So since on my
I'll
screen,
say
anyway,
something, Rami.
yeah.
I'll say something about that because I love this image and actually experienced it before I ever knew anything about Vajrayana Buddhism. But the way they articulate it is that in every molecule, there's female and male Buddhas in union, in love, in bliss. So that the actual nature of every molecule is this awakened feminine, masculine in union, in bliss, in love. And it's an awake, process simultaneously. So I just love that formulation. And it's extremely, when I've experienced that, it's extremely embodied. It's in every cell. It's like, it's even more than every cell. It's in everything, in the entirety of what is. So we hear from, say, for example, Taoism, the yin and yang when we move into appearances, we have masculine and feminine, yin and yang. So this idea that the yin and yang in actuality is in complete love, complete union, complete bliss at all times.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Aika, you want to?
Yeah. What is actually attractive in the Sufism is not really different from what yoga is saying. He says that we are slave to our body, to our mind. And then it says that it doesn't call it as a nirvana, but it is called en-al-haq, which means to say that God is everything and you will be experiencing that. So this freedom, this liberation from the slavery is actually the big concept of Sufism, just like yoga. I think that is the big message of Sufism, that it is giving you the opportunity to become more of yourself, to know yourself, and also to know what God is about. And so that you can just bring everything together. So that is the big message for me.
Sraddhalu, anything you want to add
Yeah.
that you haven't?
I think the point you were trying to bring in is that the body should not be denigrated, and that its participation in the spiritual is what you want to bring in. Where the yogis experience that ananda, or the bliss of the divine consciousness, and they experience it, of course, in the body equally as much as in the totality of their consciousness, of which the body is a small part. When they have that experience, then one experiences the entire body. There's no one place, there's no one organ, there's no separate cell. It is, as Lama Palden described, within every cell including, because everything is part of the same oneness, but in its own distinct way. And each piece experiences the bliss of union with the divine. And you are not separate from the universe. I'll share with you an experience rather than speaking of a personal experience. I'll share an experience I had with somebody when I met him. It was in Hong Kong. He was a professor of computer science, by the way. and we're talking about his projects, and then he speaks of words which sounded very unusually familiar. And I said, do you follow any religion, any philosophy? He says, no, no, no. Then I said, where is this language coming from? And then he said to me that when he was about 18 years old, one day he woke up and he had this incredible experience that he felt the entire universe was alive. And every single object in the universe was alive. And from every single object, there was this intense love pouring towards him. And from within him, there was this intense love pouring towards every single object equally but differently. I'm, of course, giving details which he gave in a different way. And he lived in this for a few days and he couldn't function normally anymore. And at which point I said, so then what happened? I was waiting for some great revelation and consequence of this. He said, well, my friends took me to a psychiatrist and he put me on medication and the experience went away. So I said to him, if you were in India, you would have been venerated as a saint.
Right. So it's like when Mansur al-Haq says, you know, I am truth, or Jesus says, I and the Father are one. If they had said that in India, they, like Sraddhalu said, they would have been honored as saints. Saying it where they said it, they were killed. So, yeah, it's better to be born in a place that understands these things if these things are your experience. So we're going to open this up, and there's some questions. I'm trying to keep track, and we're not, I doubt we'll get to all of them. But one of the questions that I thought just sort of fits at the moment, and my apologies to anyone I don't get to, or most of you probably, and some of them are quite detailed and probably should be addressed to the individual outside this forum, quite specific to a tradition. But someone wrote, let me see if I can find it here. I'll just read you the question. Would you agree that mysticism is often caused by an evolutionary crisis in consciousness, a spiritual emergency? So I'm not exactly sure what's meant by mysticism here, but let's talk for a second about evolutionary crisis in consciousness. So just from what I remember Sraddhalu saying in the very beginning, there can't, I'm reading into what you said, you can certainly correct me, but there can't be an evolutionary crisis because all of this is part of the divine unfolding and it's all going the way it's got to go. And so there's no crisis.
Well, the crisis also is part of the unfolding. So
or the crisis is part of the, yeah, okay, good. Good. You can't.
It's a play of the divine in its finite pieces, you see.
Right. You can't lose with non-duality because everything fits, right? So why do we have then, let me ask the question differently. Why do we have mysticism? Meaning by mysticism, the inner working of a tradition. Why do we have the outer form where the religions don't agree? I mean, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. These are not variations on a theme. When you go to the mystics, you discover they're speaking from an experience of a perennial wisdom that humanity shares. So you find it in all these traditions, but the traditions do differ. I mean, just from the gross level, in Judaism, God, and Islam, for that matter, God doesn't have a son, whereas God without a son in Christianity isn't God. So there are these surface differences, I would say, and then the inner truth, which is more common to them. So my question is, what causes the split between the unified mystical truth or the unifying mystical truth and the diversity and often violence that the diversity creates? Why do we have the surface and the depth? Why did that evolve? And any of you can jump in on that if anybody has an opinion.
Yeah, let me start with Sufism then. You know, there are always two aspects when it comes to Islam. When one is the exoteric part and one is the esoteric part. The esoteric part is the Sufism. And it is only given to people who are asking. First of all, there are two rules that you can get into Sufism. One is that you should be asking for that. And then you start searching, but not to anyone that start to search is given the practice or the teaching or whatever that, secret doctrine that they have in it. You need to show the sincerity. And the sincerity comes with the exoteric practices. So in my opinion, you are having the exoteric practices so that you can show the guru or murshid in Sufis that you are sincere enough, that you are not dwelt into this world just like the rest of the people. That is the idea of these exoteric practices. So what I see is there are some people who do not practice at all. There are some people who are called Muslims, just like me, not practicing anything, but by birth we are Muslims. And if you just want to get involved with the religion itself, then the path starts opening itself. But it starts opening itself in time with your sincerity. That means, do you really just want to take the burden to make all these practices? And the only reason that any person that would just take that step is to ask itself, who am I? That big question that yoga texts are also mentioning about. So if you are just happy in the world, just doing whatever that you do not ask that question ever. But if you are just enough of this world and you start questioning, then the quest starts. But with the quest, that doesn't mean everyone is in the quest. So it's maybe a curiosity that you would like to get over with. So the sincerity part is also important. And I think every religion is also having that esoteric part itself, only for the seekers, the real seekers.
So in a sense, there is a crisis that develops in an individual's life where they start to ask that question, and that drives them to be a real seeker.
Well, not necessarily a crisis, something, I mean, sometimes it happens in the childhood. Sometimes it comes with a bad experience, sometimes with a good experience. Of course, it is more common, I think, that it comes with a bad experience that you start questioning why that happened to me. With the good experiences, we just feel that we deserve it already. And I think, it can come anyway. So it is about the evolution of the soul itself. It's, you can ask that question, but there are so many people that are going through bad experiences that are not asking this question ever. So, I mean, if we go with that logic that you just said, then everyone that was having a bad experience should have become a mystic, which is not the case. They become more angry, they become more worldly, they just want to have more power. So it doesn't just cause and effect thing that is there. It's about the timing of the soul is important. Is it ready for it or not? So the gurus of Sufis are trying to figure out if the sincerity part. Therefore, I was telling you that. So when you just go to a guru, because I know certain people that went through that in my friend groups. They are not accepted in the second day. It is not like a yoga instruction certification program. So they don't allow you to be in neither. So they just throw you away. They say that go back to the world. So it takes some time for you to convince that guru to accept you as a disciple. I think it is not different than what was happening in yoga, like maybe 20 years ago. It's not like, 100 years ago, before everything became a certification or presentation or workshops. It was the same idea that the guru-disciple process was there also in yoga. Still, this Sufism, they are managing to keep that, because in the Sufi tradition, they do not have the involvement of money. That's a big, I think, a plus point for them. If they have that money thing involved, then the certification and then, workshops will start with them also. That's how I feel.
Dharmeshwar,
Rami, before you proceed, I would like to respond to your two questions.
Sure, great.
Important. You've actually split it into two questions already. The first question being about this crisis leading to mystical breakthrough. I'll put it another way. It's not quite the way it is. Since everything is moving forward all the time, whether you like it or not, and the universe itself as the divine embodiment moves forward, if you stay static, it squeezes you and compels you to move. Equally, within you, there are parts which are growing at different paces. But when something within you, the mystic part within you, the mystic that you are already within, the deeper layers, begin to push forward, and there are parts on the surface which resist and cannot yield, then it creates a crisis because of the crushing pressure. So the crisis was caused by the mystical experience emerging, not that the mystic experience came from the crisis. So the sequence is to be corrected. Okay.
So okay. Let me ask you a question about that on a much different plane. So what you're, I absolutely understand, and I'm fascinated by this idea that you just shared. What about in the larger world? Could you see, could you say that the crisis that the world is experiencing now, and there's so many, right? There's the environmental crisis, there's the racism, there's, you know, all the different things that are happening to us as, or maybe with us as a species. Could they be understood as the crushing of the resistance by the evolutionary impulse that we are?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this up, because not only an individual can have multiple crises, even after you take to the spiritual path, there are crises because there are parts which resist and do not yield to the change. But on a collective level also, there are parts which resist and do not yield. And when there is a collective on a scale of humanity, that's the crisis we are seeing today. And Sri Aurobindo makes it a point to say that this is an evolutionary crisis. It's a crisis of consciousness, requiring us to shift one level in consciousness if we are to survive. And the parts of humanity that don't do it experience the crushing pressure. And either they collapse under the crushing pressure, or they are dragged into a change which they are not ready for, or they struggle to cope up with. But yes, it is an evolutionary crisis today on a global scale.
So what's the role, and this isn't just for you, Sraddhalu, this is for anybody. So what's the role of the yogi, the mystic, let me put it this way. In Judaism, there is a tradition, it was revealed in about 1700 years ago, but it's a much older tradition. In Judaism, there's a tradition that there has to be 36 awake individuals on the planet at any given time if the evolution is, if the crisis isn't going to devolve into something quite devastating. So the number 36 is a mystical number. We don't have to go into that. So don't take that literally. But the idea is that the universe survives, or Earth, let's just say, Earth survives, human civilization survives because of the mystic, using that word loosely, because of the awake individual, because of the bodhisattva, because of the Sufi saying, however you want to, the arhat, whatever the term might be for you, that those people are absolutely necessary to maintain human civilization. So I'm just curious what you think the role of the mystic is. So
the more awake, yeah, the more, you know, beings that are more awake and more consciously one with all, and have attained these higher states of realization consciousness we're talking about, that changes consciousness for everyone, for the entirety, because there's no separation actually of your consciousness, my consciousness, anybody else's consciousness. So to me, it's the mystic's role or whatever to actually, you know, evolve as much as possible, that that joining with it that Sraddhalu brought up in the very beginning, the conscious joining with it, not only in order to liberate ourselves, but to liberate all beings, you know, and to make a difference in terms of the unified consciousness of all beings. So I think there's a very important role in that sense, and there's both an inner and outer role in that sense as well.
So the work that you're all doing do you see, or can you see, the work that the three of you are doing, and many other people, maybe
And
many
you are
other
doing.
people. Thank you, Sraddhalu. The work that I am doing and you are doing your best to imitate. The work that you are all doing is vital. It's, I mean, lots of people say, oh, this spiritual stuff, it has nothing to say to racism. It has nothing to say to sexism and misogyny. It has nothing to say to ending war and all the rest of that. And religion is, and of course they're talking about the religion on the surface, the what I call big religion, like big pharma, the brand name religions are perpetuating the very violence that they all say they don't want to see. But so you mystics are irrelevant. But I'm suggesting, and I think I'm hearing it from you, that the work you're doing is evolutionarily vital. And so the question I have is, if someone wants to do this work, if they feel called to this, and this is based on a question someone asked, do they have to go through a specific tradition to get to the mystical? Can they jump right into the mystical? Do they have to become something else first? And just to add to that in your answer, with the exception of myself and Sraddhalu, and I think this is true of you, Eka, is you're not in the traditions that you were born into. Like Lama Palden, you weren't born into Tibetan Buddhism, I'm assuming. And Ika, you said you're not a practicing Muslim. So did you have to find the system that worked for you, and then you had to go so deep into it that in a sense you're leaving it behind? That's probably too much to say, but you're moving through a specific system to a mysticism that is greater
Rami,
than the system
even
itself.
for you and me, although we were born in a tradition, what we know of the tradition and live of it today is very different from what we were born in.
Yes, absolutely.
So I would put it this way: it doesn't matter which tradition you're born in. Even within your tradition, you need to go deeper to that esoteric dimension. Otherwise, you've not got it. As long as you're stuck with the exoteric, you're as lost and you're adding to the confusion, and the religion is not helping. And that's the point. I want to just comment on this because you raised this earlier about the difference between the esoteric and exoteric, why at all this distinction came, and link it to your current question. Yes, because this is a spiritual crisis today, the need of the hour is a spiritual awakening. There is no other solution to current problems. You cannot solve it by economics, politics, and social and other changes, or even with the internet and networking technology. You can only solve it by a change of consciousness. And people like us who have dedicated their lives for a spiritual self-culturing can play a role to the extent that we have cultured ourselves. And we can only help others to the extent that we've been able to help ourselves. And it stops with that. You can, of course, help others by pointing to the moon, but until you're on the moon, you can't really show them the moon directly. But still, we can play a role, and we're all in it together. But the need for the esoteric separation, which was present, let's say, a few centuries ago, is now no more so needed. It was necessary then because of the nature of the evolution. The mass of humanity was not ready for a direct experience of deeper things. But we are at a time, because it's a spiritual crisis, that the mass is actually ready. And so much which was esoteric has already come forward and needs to come forward, except elements which can be potentially misused, and every tradition has power aspects. But the knowledge aspect and spiritual experience aspect needs to flood out today, but in a living experience, not in a preachy type.
So if this is a spiritual crisis, and I happen to agree, and that the only real response, excuse me, the only real response has got to be rooted in that awakening. And as Eka said a moment ago, not everybody wants to wake up. You know, it's like in the Matrix movie, you could take the red pill or the blue pill. One of them wakes you up and one of them allows you to just keep sleeping through reality. Most people want to sleep through reality. So, you know, again, in the Jewish tradition, they say you need 36 people who are awake to make this work. But are you, and this is to anybody, everybody, are you hopeful that such a spiritual awakening or spiritual revolution can happen? Or do things have to get much, much worse before that the evolutionary spiritual impulse, that's being blocked, smashes through? How, yeah, I guess how bad does it have to get? If it isn't happening now, what further hell can we anticipate? So let's move. So Aika, you want to take that?
Okay. Yeah. Let me say a couple of things about it from Islamic view. In Islam also, not 36, but there are seven people that is talked about, and there are 3 people that are talked about that is shouldering all the pain in the world. So if the world is there and if the human race is continuing, it is because of these 7s and because of these 3s. And they're not even called people, we call them 7s and 3s. So there are some entities that are holding to the world, and they are just taking all the burden so that we continue. And about these crises, this COVID and everything else, again, the world is going to end whenever it is going to end. And it is the big mystery of the plan of the God. And so it cannot be changed, it cannot be predicted, and it is also not suggested to be predicted, but it is told that these 7s and these 3s know about it, but they do not reveal it. And there are some rumors about who is that 7, who was that 3. And because some human entities, human people are, I don't know, the gossip is that there are some people that are one of these 7 or one of these 3s, but of course, if these cults are talking about this, so we can never be sure if that is the truth or not. But when the disciples of these gurus ask to these people about what is going to happen, they do not answer that. So it is much better in that Islamic view to continue your practices. That is what actually people are talking about. They say continue your practice and have the devotion, continue the tapas or the discipline activities, and you'll be fine. Whatever that will happen is good enough. So it is more like in Islam, you do not have that control. As long as you do not have that state, like samadhi, nirvana, kaivalya, so you just do what you were told. That aspect is there so much. So you become a devotee, and then you just do whatever that you have to do, prescribed by your guru. That is a big idea. Other than that, you don't get that information that much. When it comes to me, why I practice yoga, philosophy more, because it is more revealed, to be honest. It is more open. I can just reach to the scriptures and to gurus, and I feel more accepted there.
Lama Paul, do you want to jump in on this?
Well, I think, I don't think people necessarily, I agree with Sraddhalu that this is a time when people can access the mystical more directly, and many people are, and these teachings are more available. And my own experience, and I think others have had too, that for me, going and getting in-depth involved with Vajrayana Buddhism opened up Christianity even more, like Sraddhalu was saying. So my experience of Christianity has grown over my whole lifetime. I still consider myself a Christian. I'm also an initiated Sufi and experience, myself as that too. But I don't think it matters so much. It's just really within the heart, which is what's so important. And my own teacher said to us at one point that he really wanted us, he was requesting, actually telling some of us to assist in this whole crisis for the next 2 to 3 lifetimes, to show up here and to be of whatever assistance possible. And I asked him, well, what could we do? What could possibly help? And he said, really, ultimately, the only thing that's going to matter for each individual is whether their heart is open or not. And if people's heart is open, it will go well for them. Otherwise, it's going to be what Sraddhalu was talking about, the resistance to the reality of love, the reality of an open heart is going to be very painful for those people. So that it actually comes down to an individual level. And hopefully, you know, the scale will be such that there'll be enough people, humans, who open our hearts that humanity will continue to survive and to evolve on this planet as it is, you know. So, of course, I think all of us very much hope that the human race, that we won't need to destroy our incredible environment, you know. And, you know, if we do, from a Buddhist point of view, there's, and I'm sure in Hinduism and Sufis, there's many myriads of world systems that we can be reborn in, because consciousness is deathless. So we're not ultimately gonna die, and we're not ultimately gonna get out of this whole evolutionary thing without actually surrendering to it and having it happen. But we all have parts of ourselves that are kicking and screaming where we need to surrender. And, you know, I think we can really pray and hope for the best for humanity, that we can rise to the occasion.
Well, I admit to being attached to the human element. Right,
Rabbi, you've raised two very important questions. I'd like to address both briefly, though. One is this about whether you need to get into a path in order to enter a poise of awakening. But there's important correction to make. You keep speaking of awakened people and not awakened people as if it's a binary. But you yourself said earlier, before our session began, that growth is unending. And so there's no such thing as somebody who's totally awakened. Even within the esoteric traditions, they speak of degrees of awakening or degrees of divinization, and perfection and divinity is itself infinite in potential. So let's not speak of awakened people. We'll speak of everybody who's on the path towards awakening, some more, some less, relatively in terms. But
and that would, Sraddhalu, just to clarify, so that would also mean there's no, if everyone's on the path, everyone's got some level of this awakening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Everyone's on the path, unconsciously or consciously.
Well, it's and it's innate is who we are. We have to always remember that.
Yes.
It's baked into the cake of who we are.
But the nature of the crisis is forcing us into a conscious awakening. That's the difference, although everybody is on an unconscious path. But the question whether we need to join a formal path, I would, in fact, not recommend that to a lot of people, because the moment you get into a formal path, you get slotted into the forms of the path, which is precisely what you don't need. And that's going to bind you into appearances and practices and rituals, which are not the mystical and spiritual dimension. I would say follow that which leads you deeper into the spiritual experience. But again, with a caveat, you can't just get into it and hope for it, and you might get lost. And every path warns about getting lost into some fantasy and thinking it's a spiritual experience. So if you're lucky, somebody comes into your life who represents, even in relative terms, someone who's more conscious or more awake or can guide you, or you have books through which you make contact with someone, but you have to have a contact with a living experience in the body or without the body, ideally. But if you don't have that, the divine presence is within each one of us. And if you can take the trouble to put yourself in touch with that, it can guide you, and it will lead you to external supports where and when needed. But if you make the error of giving yourself totally to one teacher and say, he is God or he is enlightened, I give myself totally, you are in for a rude shock, because every human teacher is going to be exposed for their limitations in the present circumstances. So that's your one question. You have also made another question, which is important. Will things get worse? And that's important to recognize. If you see the nature of the crisis today, because of the push to change, a part of humanity wakes up and accepts change, another part does not wake up or refuses change. And what we are seeing today is a split in humanity. And it's becoming more and more vivid, more and more distinct. So in the part that turns to growth, you will see things rapidly increasing in growth and in the positive outcomes, in spite of difficult appearances. Because, you know, when there's a tidal wave, you can surf the wave. It carries you even without your effort, if you balance yourself consciously. But the part which is refusing to change gets smashed, and things will get worse there. So to answer your question, in parts of humanity, in activities, in spaces, you will see things get worse and far worse. And if they could get worse, it would get worse still. And on the other extreme, you'll see things get better and better and better in those parts where there's a conscious attempt to grow and awaken. So we are in for very interesting times, the likes of which we have never seen on earth before.
Which could be a good thing. I
Of
mean,
course.
from what you're saying. Let me ask about women. So let me address this to Lama Palden and Eka. One of the revolutionary things that's happening and it's been happening for a little while, with religion, spirituality, you can take those as you wish, is the empowerment of women, or the entry of women into positions of authority, a deeper recognition of, let me put it this way, a crumbling of the patriarchy to some extent. And perhaps what we're seeing is, in this current crisis, will be the actual collapse of patriarchy. Not necessarily being replaced by a matriarchy, but the old power structure is maybe dying. And part of its demise is caused by women. And I mean that in a good way, right? The power, the growing power of women within yogic traditions, within various religious traditions, is in and of itself transformational. So I'm just, if I'm making any sense, I wonder what Eka, Lama Palden, you think about that notion of women being a revolutionary force, or at least certain women being a revolutionary force in the current crisis.
Well, I think that, you know, it's all generalizing, but I think in a generalizing way, women tend to think of more of others, of everyone together. And how are we all going to fare in this? Not just my family, my tribe, you know, or me, not just me. But this is, of course, a gross generalization, because many men think like this as well. But I think that the inclusion of women into all sectors of society can have a much more balancing effect to bring in some different kinds of values and perspectives that can be a benefit. And so, you know, hopefully that will aid in our evolution of consciousness.
So what
do you feel, Eka? Oh.
Well, before we ask Eka to jump in, Lama Palden, do you get a sense, well, it sounds like this is what you were saying, that, and I'm not opposed to this, I can't remember her first name, but Gillian, when the woman who did studies on ethics, boys versus girls, little boys, little girls, found that the ethical principles under which boys and girls operate, either from nature or nurture, maybe it's actually in the brain. I've read somewhere that women's brains have more neurological connections between the hemispheres than men's brains do. If in fact women are more inclined to this spiritual evolutionary movement, and that society has been resisting that movement, therefore resisting women, and now as women come in more powerfully, and I recognize this is gross generalization, as women come in more powerfully, we get that greater sense of we're all in this together, and that will ultimately transform even the esoteric religions that we've got at the moment. There'll be, the patriarchy will die, and you'll be, you know, elevated to, you know, Her Holiness. You'll be the 15th. You know, you'll come back. You'll come back as the 15th Dalai Lama.
As far as I can tell, the patriarch is alive and well. But you know, I don't know if it's actually helpful to think about it in terms of gender. I do see, though, that as the doors have opened up in spiritual circles and traditions for women to really practice in depth and have the equal training to men, that you know, in all the various kind of centers where people are really focused on a spiritual path, and not just in that outer form way that Sraddhalu was talking about, but in an inner sense, women are flocking. I mean, the numbers of whether it's Sufi or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, all over the world, there's, you know, the numbers are much more than 50% women that are very interested in this kind of work. But I think we really need to think more in terms of our human values, and can we all shift toward really caring about each other and caring beyond our little family or our tribe or our nation, and really understand that what's, you know, best for each of us is what's best for the whole, and that as long as any of us are really suffering, it's, you know, then we all are in that sense. So I think, I'm not so sure it's helpful to look at it in gender terms, but, you know, to really look at where are our values at and where do we really want to stand up for our values. And I think going back to consciousness, if people awaken more, evolve more in terms of consciousness, then we understand that we're fundamentally equal. We want justice for all. We want what's best for all. And that's why consciousness means so much and makes such a difference. Because the more we evolve in consciousness, we care more about each other and we can find the solutions for the whole.
Okay, thank you. So
I'm so grateful to you for this response, Lama Palden. It's so refreshing because somewhere in the media you'll find a lot of this male bashing, toxic masculinity, and bashing males and promoting women as if they are the solution for all problems. And it's a reversal of one perversion being replaced by another perversion. I would put it in an evolutionary context by saying that even the period of many centuries where in some parts of the world men dominated and other parts of the world women did dominate also, and we had matriarchal societies. Even in India we have them even today from going back centuries. It was because the evolutionary force had certain objectives and certain pushes and pulls, that women pushing forward and saying we need our rights were pushed back, and the others refused to get into that movement. It so happens that the evolutionary force says, okay, that phase is over now. I want all humanity to grow and come forward equally, and the gender does not matter. And it's a choice nature has made. And the result is you have women popping up and men accepting, yes, you're right. And the change is happening very rapidly and amazingly rapid in evolutionary terms. Within a generation or two, we see huge changes. The idea is, you must recognize, it's not about some women standing up and shouting which made the change, but nature herself decided that that phase is over, the work done is done, now there's a new phase. And in this, we are all equally spiritual beings first, not biologically gender-based. And yes, of course, our gender has distinctions, like you said, nature has given those distinctions, but those are starting points. In terms of consciousness, as we come into our own, we can override those biological distinctions and be free of them, and even realize the full divine potential irrespective of our biological limitations. We may even turn that divine energy onto our body and work to transform the body itself from its limitations. And even Sri Aurobindo uses this phrase, divinize the body and even the physical substance. The body is not meant to be a temporary support. It's not meant to be a vehicle of ignorance. It's meant to be a vehicle of divine manifestation. But for that, we need to experience something of the divine consciousness and then bring it into the body to transform it. That's the nature of the evolutionary work in the present and future.
Okay, so let me get to Eka, and then I want to do something a little different.
You know, this world, I will also make a generalization, of course, but this world is turning on about, you know, two things in most of the religions and philosophies. It is the gold and women. And so these are the two aspects that why, you know, we are involved in these worldly matters. So when we say that the world is going to be changing because the women qualities are changing also by all the practices that people, the women especially, are getting into spiritual practices. So when you change the qualities or the gunas or fitrat of women, by these spiritual practices, and there is a change with the human in this world, then this world is going to change, because this is actually what is holding the world together, what is holding the society together. I mean, the gold and the women, just remove the women and change the psychology of women from being materialistic to being spiritually oriented. And if the women follow that, the man is going to follow that also, because they just want to continue their progeny. And this gold is changing hands anyway. So I think it is also the destiny of the world, because it has been such a long time, as everyone else was saying, that when you look at all the spiritual groups, it's more than 50% that we see, it's all the women, especially in my country, Turkey. The yoga groups, there are like 70%, 80%, 90%, they are all women practitioners. And when we look at the people that are interested in yoga philosophy, not Sufism, because I'm not a student, as I said, but with yoga philosophy, it is 99%, it's all women. So when the change starts from the society, from the women, then I'm definitely sure that the society is going to be changed. In one generation, just give one generation.
I think that's a very important point, because the impact that a woman can have on society is far greater than a man, because she directly impacts her children. And that is the most direct way of transmitting even spiritual values.
So what I'd like to do, for two reasons. One, because I'm really curious, and two, because I don't know how much time we have left. So Hannah, I don't know if you want to unmute and come online. I'd love to see, okay, Anuradha, thank you, Marianne and Dina. I'd like to get the women who put this all together to join us and to talk about this issue of, I don't know how you want to talk about women's consciousness, women's spirituality, or like Sraddhalu said, it's not gendered, but where you see this transfer, if you see a transformation in society, and what role are women playing in this? I mean, this is after all sponsored by,
Rami, I'll jump in here, because the whole mission of GPIW changed over 20 years. Whereas initially it was to create a platform for women spiritual teachers, it shifted toward creating the space for the divine feminine to come through. And we are very balanced in terms of gender. We've talked about the fact that our name came about through a very strange way. It wasn't the intention to create the name of Global Peace. Well, first it was just the Global Peace Initiative. But we were a group of women who came together to do this because 20 years ago, there was no space for women in the interfaith world. But through our evolution, it became the awakening of the awareness of the divine feminine, of the mother, which 20 years ago, in the interfaith world, which was mostly male and Abrahamic, there was no place for the divine mother. And as you can see, we all know this now, she is very active. Whether for me it's Narayani or Mata Parvati or Tara, for you, Rami, it's Mary. In the many forms that this divine feminine energy takes, she's working on the transformation. That is her role, the transformation. So for me, it's less about whether you're in a male or a female body, is whether you are attuned to this divine feminine energy, which is so much needed now to help with this evolutionary process. And
so let me just
Sri Aurobindo community, there was Sri Aurobindo and there was the mother. And that's one of the few examples we have of this balance of the divine masculine and the divine feminine energy. And I have felt increasingly, it's very important, I'm a Ram Bhakta, I'm a devotee of Sri Ram and Mata Sita, of this balance between the higher male qualities and the higher female qualities. So it's not just of creating the space for the divine feminine energy to come in, it's also awakening the higher masculine energies so that we can again become a world in balance. Because the problem is we become so out of balance. So it's bringing back that harmony between these various expressions of the divine energy that is needed for our evolutionary progress.
So just to clarify, so yes, I've had experiences with Mary as Theotokos, the mother of God, but my actual Ishwara is Chochma Sophia. You know, it's more in the Jewish end of things, though the Divine Mother isn't. She doesn't belong to any religion, and I don't know if she pays dues to any. I tend to think not.
Or maybe all of them.
Or maybe she has enough that she can.
Well,
share
we
with
are all
them.
her children equally.
Yes, I know that's true. That's true. So I don't know. Miriam, Hannah, you want to jump in on this? And the answer is no.
I'll say a few things about the divine feminine is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like we're at a point now in human civilization where the feminine is so needed because she is the nurturer, she is the nourisher of life. And if we look at every aspect of society right now, it needs nourishment, care, love, healing. And this is very much in the realm of the feminine. So I think it is also the feminine that weaves relationships. And this is what we see happening kind of in the alternative models of development here now on the planet. Relationships with the land, relationships in community, with the older generation, younger generation, between interfaith, between different religions. So she has so much work to do right now. And I think whatever we can do to support the role of the feminine will benefit everybody.
Anuradha, where are you on this?
I would side a little more with Sraddhalu, and I think what all of us are also recognizing, there was a quotation from Rumi that I came across, which said that the lamps are different, but the light is the same. So I think both yoga and the mystics tend to guide us towards connecting to that light within, which can be represented in different lampshades, let's say. So that lampshade could have the form of a male body or a female body. That lampshade could be in the form of different religious traditions. That lampshade could be in the form of different colors, races, whatever. But I think that what yoga is inviting us to do is to connect to that essential light, which shines pretty much in the same way in all of us, beyond our differences of form, gender, etc. So I think that is what we are all aspiring in different ways to achieve.
Okay. So
I comment on Marianne's observation about the feminine qualities being essential, and I think the point which she made was so important, but perhaps it's people tend to reduce it to gender terms, whereas what she was describing was the feminine quality, and as a psychological quality, it is universal and available to men equally. And so what is needed in the evolution of humanity is the awakening and the right balance of both the masculine and feminine aspects of our psychological being, and to that extent, the divine feminine and the divine masculine equally need to be realized within us and manifested in our work. But the point which she makes is that in large parts of society, and I would say a lot of the West particularly, the aspect of the masculine as a coarse, exaggerated and unbalanced form has predominated, let's say, in the last 100 years, and that needs a kind of a correction, but it's specific to certain spaces and maybe even to certain individuals. In my own experience, though, when I go to the West, there are far more women eagerly interested in deepening their spiritual experience and sensitive and receptive to directly enter it than men. But when I come into India and generally the East, the balance is almost equal, men and women. And so perhaps that is an indication of the correction needed in certain parts of the world.
So, give me a sense of the time, because I think we're over, right?
I
Yes,
think
we're over.
It would also be nice to hear Hannah, because she came.
Yes, I was going to ask. Yes. So where are you?
So I'll
Right.
just speak from the perspective of the tradition that I'm following. I am initiated into Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya, or a Bhakti Yoga lineage. And our lineage is really based around Krishna, but really Krishna in the form of Lord Chaitanya. And a lot of people, especially in India, are familiar with Krishna and Radha and this divine love, the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And Lord Chaitanya came to show us how interlinked these two are and how much they're needed. So he possessed what was called the Ladini Shakti, and he came as Radha and Krishna, and Radha's love fed into Krishna's love, and Krishna's love fed into Radha's love, and that was what was manifest. And we manifest that through chanting. And so that's one perspective I'm coming from. I'm not really sure if that answers any type of question, but also in my tradition, we believe strongly, and I believe strongly in reincarnation. So I know that I'm in a woman's body now in this lifetime, but I've had many lifetimes in a man's body. And ultimately, I'm not my body and I'm not my gender. And to a certain extent, gender as we see it today, especially in the West, is a construct. Like, I might rub some people the wrong way when I say this, but sometimes I think there's too much emphasis, especially in America, on gender and like what your pronouns are. And I feel like it's such a narrow focus, and like we're so much more than our pronouns. We are spirit soul, and that is our ultimate identity. Our identity is our soul and our connection to the divine, and that's where the mystic traditions come in, is really focusing on that. So I definitely echo what everyone else said, and I really support what Dina and Marianne said as well. Like, this feminine energy is very much needed right now. I do feel like in America, this is such a patriarchal society, and maybe that's why a lot of women go to yoga and why a lot of women are interested in spirituality. But a lot of men are interested, but they are afraid or intimidated because it's viewed as being girly. So I tried not to see things so much through the lens of the body, and more through the lens of the soul, and look at things sort of from a whole perspective. I'm not sure if that answers a question that you asked, but that's where I'm coming from.
Oh, that was great. Thank you. So we are going to bring this to a close. Just want to mention one other thing, that we don't get the notion that the Divine Mother is, I mean, she's also Kali. So, you know, I'm expecting as her evolutionary impact unfolds, it's going to be a wild ride, and it isn't going to be all, oh, mom loves me. And, you know, it's yes, she does, but her love is what I call a searing love. It's going to burn away everything that we hold dear that isn't in fact serving this evolutionary process. So I want to thank all of you for letting me facilitate this, and for you doing all of this, and all the people who are online with us. And I'm going to turn it back to our Anuradha, and you can wrap this up.
So, Rabbi Ramiji, thank you very much for brilliantly moderating a very thought-provoking a discussion, a dialogue. It was more than, it was more for conversation on this topic, which is yoga and mystical traditions of the world. A topic that requires a lot more deliberation, many other sessions. So we had a few days back, we had a session on another dialogue on human unity that GPIW had coordinated. And following that, Dina was saying that, you know, these are like, they're sowing seeds for then taking it up at another time and seeing how they can develop further. So thank you very much for those thought-provoking questions and the answers to each and every one of the panelists. So Aicha Gurelmanji, thank you very much for bringing in valuable perspectives from the Sufi tradition. Sraddhaluji, it's always very enlightening to listen to the clarity of your presentations. So thank you very much for bringing in the perspective from Sri Aurobindo philosophy, as well as the larger yogic tradition of the Sanatana Dharma. And Lama Maldin Drolmaji, thank you very much for your deep insights from the Buddhist tradition and allowing us to get a taste of the unifying factor actually that exists even in that tradition. So thank you very much to every one of you. And we hope that this is only the beginning of many dialogues that GPIW coordinates and involving a lot of our friends who've joined us for this festival. So I would just like to invite Vinayji to make the announcements for tomorrow's program.
So, namaste everybody. As an observer and as also an organizer, it was really a treat to listen to all of you bringing out various perspectives in a very beautiful manner. So many different strands coming together to form a beautiful fabric. So thank you very much for that, what you offered. And also, if I can add, I think the whole purpose of mysticism is to help an individual connect with deeper experience, removing all various kinds of labels, forms, and the coverings that lay outside. And that is a work in progress. It's a long walk, long journey, and dialogue is most essential to continue that. And all of you contributed immensely to this dialogue, which all of us will be taking it forward. So thank you once again, all of you. With this, I would like to just present the events of tomorrow. So continuing our journey into different dimensions of yoga, tomorrow morning in the 7 to 8 a.m. slot, we have Swamini Swatma Vidyananda, who is the Chief Acharya of Arsha Vijnana Gurukulam in Atlanta, US. She will be presenting on yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. And in the noon session, that is between 11:30 to 12:30, we have a practice session that is yoga for back care, focusing on therapeutic aspects led by Omkar. And in the evening, we have Dr. Lorenzo Cohen, who is the Director of Integrative Medicine Program, University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Research Institute, USA, who will be presenting on yoga and mystical traditions of the world. In fact, Dr. Lorenzo Cohen is a known name in the field of integrative medicine, and also his book, Anti-Cancer Living, is one of the best books in that area. So he will be with us interacting and presenting on this most interesting topic. So I invite all of you to join us and continue this journey for next 20 days that we are all on it. And I would also like to again repeat that all our sessions are being recorded and they're available on Indica Yoga YouTube channel. You may want to revisit them. They're all available for free. Please make use of it. And all our programs are also announced on Indica Yoga website, where you can get to know about the next week's program. So please look into it and mark your schedules and do join us for this wonderful pilgrimage that we have started. With this, I thank once again and go back to our panelists asking for what their message, the parting message that they would like to share with all our participants who joined us from different parts of the world.
May I just add one thing there? There was a question by Rajkumariji who says that, you know, how can we allow our insights, or how can we utilize these insights we've had about the mystical traditions, yoga and mystical traditions, to bring the world closer together in a world that in certain ways seems to be tearing apart due to certain religious ideas, certain religious ideologies. So, and also with Kali now playing her form out through COVID, and you know, forcing us to turn inwards by shutting out our external possibilities. So, what would be your message? First of all, how can people reach out to you? And please give us a message of hope, of yes, a positive look into the world today. So, I would request Rabbi Rami Shapiro ji to maybe say some things, because you very brilliantly moderated everything, but we really know that there's a lot that you have to say on each one of the questions that you ask the others as well. So
so if I have an hour and a half, I can answer all those questions. And I do appreciate your using the word brilliant twice in referencing me. So I appreciate that. You know, if I had a closing message, or, you know, one insight that I hope people take from all of this, or just take in general, is that there is no path in or out of this. this is reality. This is the suchness. Whether you have a tradition, you don't have a tradition, you're seeking a tradition, you're not seeking a tradition, this is going to unfold the way it's going to unfold. This is the mother's work. This is Kali's work. And I don't think we can even surrender to it as a verb, something under my control. I think the gift of this time is going to be being surrendered to it. That it's very much like in the 12-step program, where in the first step you realize you're powerless over your addiction. We're powerless over this unfolding. And that the more we try to bend it to our will, the more desperate things are going to become. But eventually, because we have no control, ultimately, that's a fiction. Eventually, because we have no control, we will be surrendered. And it's like when you're surrendered to, you fall into the water and you're struggling to get out, and the more you struggle, the more likely it is you're going to drown. But if you're surrendered to it, and it's grace, it's not something you do. If you're surrendered to it, you discover suddenly the water holds you up. So my thought that I would leave people with from me is, whatever you do it with as much love as possible, and know, not hope, but know that eventually you will be broken and you will be uplifted at the very moment you're broken, that the brokenness is the path to this greater wholeness. So let's move to Eka. You have to unmute yourself.
You say that this is the work of Kali. I would say that is the work of Shiva. The Agora aspect is actually what we are seeing from my point of view. And so, as you said, if you just surrender, it is just another aspect. And it is not because we do not have any control of it. Do we really need to have a control of it? It is like, what Christ says in the Bible. He says, there's this discussion with his disciples, and they say we need to just take the fish out of the water so that we will not starve. But then the Christ says, the birds do not care about, you do not worry about tomorrow of having the fish or not, but the Father is always giving them the fish. And it is the same concept, I think. When we say surrender, we make a debate. There is no debate, to my understanding. There's actually no debate. Just surrender yourself and accept it as it is, and just watch. It is the marvelous of it, and just expect that as the Father of everything. He will just be deciding on whatever that is good that will be coming on to you, and surrendering means to accept what is going to come to you as well. So do not nag about it. If you nag about it, you're not surrendered anyway. So we really do not know, and I think that is the beauty of it. It is scary. I'm a woman. I like control, to be honest. But when I feel about it as a agora of Shiva, then I feel more relieved. I want to keep it that way. Otherwise, it's more scary. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So Lama Palden, did we lose her?
I think she lost her link.
Ah, she lost her link. That's what's happening to a lot of us, Sraddhalu. We've lost our link. So good. We will give you the last word.
I think the single most important thing I'd like to convey is that you are not alone. The divine presence is within you, is you in your deepest truth, but equally the divine presence is around you and supporting you through every circumstance. The Divine Mother, as the divine creative energy, fills you with wisdom and strength and love from within, but also embraces you with her wisdom, strength, and love from outside through complex circumstances of life. If at this moment you were to become conscious of yourself as a part of her, as a child of her, as the conscious soul that we actually are, you would have memory of the continuity of all the lives that you've been through. as well as the sense of the eternity and infinity of the journey ahead. And there would be no fear because you know yourself immortal. The Vedic rishis gave this message. They said, you are children of immortality, amritasya putraha. And therefore, you deserve to live that immortality. That is you. That is your birthright. You are immortal. And so whatever the appearances of circumstances, call for help. Ask for help. We forget to do that. It's not just a question of surrendering. There is also the aspect of calling for help. And as a mother, she responds instantly because she is not out there somewhere far away. She is right here in everything as the divine conscious energy, which forms the whole universe. She is inside your brain and knows your most intimate thought and intimate emotions. And her response is instant from inside out and outside in. Only it may not be the way you expect it. You may say, get me out of this problem. Whereas with her motherly love, she says, yes, I'll take you through it, but so that you may come out stronger and wiser. And you will get the strength, you will get the response instantly. So remember, you are immortal and you are worthy of that immortality, and it is your birthright, but it is also, as a child of the Divine Mother, she is with you constantly, ready to help, but your call makes effective her help, and therefore call, and call always.
Well, you can't end on a better note than that. So again, thank you very much for this conversation and this opportunity for me personally. Anuradha, you want to send us off?
Yes, just wanted to say again a big thank you, heartfelt gratitude to everyone for having made their time to come and share their words of wisdom and insight with our participants, and for adding hope and yeah, just basically adding hope is what I would say in these times, and the feeling of being held by the mother and being surrendered to as well. So thank you all for your very beautiful message. I don't know if Vinay wants to say something.
Just a thank you to GPIW also for facilitating this dialogue.
Yes, so with these words, thank you very much.